Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamala Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahaganatam
Sahagana
Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam
Krishna
Shaitan
Devam
Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri
Sri
Vishakan
Sham
Sham He Krishna Karuna Sindhu
Dev
Dinabandhu
Jagapati
Gopesha Gopika
Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana
Taptanjira Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadada Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, welcome to the Sunday feast again. Like last week, I'm going to read and speak on from the book Journey of Self-Discovery. If you have this book, you can have it open. The chapter is entitled Show Bottle Spiritualists Exposed. This is a conversation that Srila Prabhupada had on December 1968. December 30th, 1968, with a CBS television news reporter, right? And the main topic is, as the title suggests, is about false gurus who in the 1960s were promising many things, power, influence, stress control, salvation, you name it, right? Um, so Srila Prabhupada's messages, as usual, they're very concise but also very penetrating. This particular one starts off in a very strong way, but I think for devotees it's also a little bit humorous how this starts off. The purpose of I see twofold purpose of us um, focusing on conversations like this in Srila Prabhupada's books. One is for us to appreciate Srila Prabhupada's brilliance, um, his straightforward and honest manner in which he addresses topics. He doesn't try to please anyone. At the same time, gives the Vedic understanding without any interpretation or adulteration, right? So no spin zone. That's what Srila Prabhupada's conversations are. So the journalist starts off. Actually, the other purpose is for us to go deeper into his books, right? And hopefully inspire reading and sharing of his books with others. So the journalist starts off. I think an awful lot of our readers, an awful lot of people in the US are terribly confused with the many people who claim to be gurus and gods and who pop up in this country. One after the other, they say that, and before even the journalist completes the sentence, Srila Prabhupada says, I can declare that they're all nonsense. And then the journalist says, I wonder if you could elaborate on that a little bit. This is probably the most humorous part of this conversation. Srila Prabhupada says, I can say furthermore, they're all rascals. The journalist says, for example, the famous one who sells meditation mantras, Srila Prabhupada, he's rascal number one. I say it publicly. So, um, he doesn't beat around the bush, does he? Um, Now, one thing to point out here is people are a little bit taken aback when they hear um, words like rascals in a saint's lecture or conversation. People are usually taken aback. So, but it's important to understand rascal. One of the definitions of rascal is someone who does not follow authority, someone who does not follow authorized sources, right? Such a person is a rascal. So everything that Srila Prabhupada says has some deeper meaning attached to it, and we should understand the deeper meaning here, which is he's um, he's declaring this because this individual is not following authorized resources, right? Authorized sources of knowledge. And it's not something personal, Srila Prabhupada is not interested in personal attacks. So he clarifies when the journalist asks, could you explain, give me a little bit background on that and why? Because our readers, and then before the journalist finishes the sentence, Prabhupada says, from his behavior, I can understand he is rascal number one. I do not want to know about him, but what he has done makes it obvious. But the wonderful thing is that people in the Western countries are supposed to be so advanced. How are they befooled by these rascals? Right? So, a very important point here. So, from someone's behavior, a saintly person or a transcendentalist, a pure devotee can easily understand what their consciousness is, what their intention is, what their character is. Right? So, such a saintly person doesn't have to know, all the details about an individual who is posing as a guru but is not really a guru, right? Just by his behavior, Srila Prabhupada, like personalities, they can conclude. Because they look at the behavior, they look at the standards that are given in the Shastras, doesn't match, boom. Here's the evaluation. So, no wasting time. And then he goes into why people are looking for or people are befooled by such show bottle spiritualists, right? So the first reason he gives us, he says they want something very cheap. He's talking about people who fall for such false teachers, right? He says they want something very cheap. That is their fault. Then he says, what is the distinction in Srila Prabhupada's ISKCON? He says, now for our disciples, we don't give anything cheap. Our first condition is character, moral character. You see, unless one is strictly following moral principles, we don't initiate him, we don't allow him in this institution. This so called guru has been telling people just do whatever you like, you simply pay me $35 and I'll give you a mantra. You see? So people want to be cheated, and so many cheaters come. People do not wish to undergo any discipline. They've got money, so they think we shall pay and immediately we'll get whatever we want. The journalist gets it, says instant heaven. Srila Prabhupada says, yes, that is their foolishness. So this is very instructive for us also, right? Because we are here talking about this 42 years after this conversation as practitioners of Krishna consciousness, as followers of Srila Prabhupada. So this is very instructive for us, right? So Prabhupada says, now for our disciples, we don't give anything cheap. Our first condition is character, moral character. So to preserve um, the purity, that the standard of purity that Srila Prabhupada has given us, we need to have this very clear in our own mind. Like at no point should we compromise on this when we share Krishna consciousness with others or inspire people or encourage them to, go deeper, take initiations, stuff like that. We need to be um, very clear about this first condition, which is moral character. Our purpose is not to recruit people into Krishna consciousness. Our purpose is to inspire um, adoption of moral character. So one devotee said in one of the lectures, we are not in international society for introducing people to Krishna consciousness. Right? We are International Society for Krishna Consciousness, whose purpose is to train people in moral character. So beautiful lesson right there. So then they move on to another interesting topic, which is the journalist asks, why do you feel that younger people today are turning more and more toward Eastern oriented religions? And I think that's still true, that kind of a trend. And Srila Prabhupada says, because your materialistic way of life no longer satisfies them. He talks about, how in America everything is there, but people are still not satisfied. There is confusion and dissatisfaction, right? But in India, even though there may be a lot of poverty, people are still continuing the spiritual culture. So they are not as disturbed. So Prabhupada says this shows that material advancement alone cannot give one satisfaction. People must take to spiritual life. They do not know where they are going, they have no aim. All these people, they are in darkness. But when you're spiritually situated, you know what you're doing and where you're going. Everything is clear. So this is once again an important point. When you're spiritually situated, which means we have come to the platform where we don't harbor material conceptions in our heart, right? When you're spiritually situated, you know what you're doing and where you're going. Everything is clear. So this is why in the Bhagavad Gita, before asking Arjuna, before we should say inspiring Krishna, inspiring Arjuna to do something, he first reminds Arjuna who he is, right? What is his identity? Because if we know who we are, if we have a spiritual conception about our own self, about God, and about other living entities, then it's easy to have clarity about our own duties. If we don't know who we are, we won't have clarity about our duties, right? So there's no moral clarity as well, which is right, what is wrong, which way should I go? That clarity is just not there. So if we, on the other hand, if we know who we are, which is we are a spiritual being, part and parcel of Krishna, Mamai Vamso Jiva Loke, Jiva Bhuta Sanatana, right? Chapter 15. We are all parts and parcels of Krishna. So if we understand that, then we can be clear about what our duties are, what is right, what is wrong. And then also our goal in life, where we are going. Then they talk about how the Western religions haven't convinced um, the youth, especially, to take the message of God, right? And Srila Prabhupada makes a couple of important points there. One, he says people are looking for detailed scientific explanation of God, right? And that is not there in the Bible. High level information is there, but not very detailed. And when you don't have that, it's hard to inspire people, right? If you keep it always high level, people are looking to know more, right? So that's why Krishna book is very attractive, because it talks about the detailed activities of God. And also all the loving relationships that God has with his devotees. So people are looking for detailed information. That's one thing. Second, he points out that even the religious leaders, they're not following the moral principles, right? Thou shalt not kill, for example, is a famous commandment, but the religious leaders themselves are promoting killing, or condoning killing, we should say, in many cases. So naturally, when a leader does not follow the principles, people who follow are definitely not inspired to follow, right? When purity is not there, and when a leader does not set example, people are not inspired to follow. So that's the second reason he gives. Now, another interesting reason he also gives is he says, because the Western religions are not teaching them practically, I'm teaching them practically, right? So practical application of the wisdom, because the wisdom is actually the same. It's very simple philosophy. There is God, there is the living entity, and the purpose of life, or the natural duty of a living entity, is to serve and love God. Very simple. And that's there in every religious teaching. So Prabhupada says this is there. And that's why he says, I don't say that Christians should become Hindu. I simply say, please obey your commandments. I will make you a better Christian. That is my mission. I don't say God is not in your tradition. God is only here in ours. I simply say, obey God. I don't say you have to accept that God's name is Krishna and no other. No, I say, please obey God. Please try to love him. So Prabhupada says, I'm teaching people how to love God. That is the difference. Therefore, young people are attracted. The journalist then says, so the end is the same, but it's the method of getting there that's different. Srila Prabhupada clarifies, no, the end is the same and the method is also the same. But these so-called religious leaders are not teaching people to follow the method. I'm teaching them practically how to follow it. Right? So once again, to reiterate or repeat the three reasons that Srila Prabhupada gives as to why um, the youth in general are turning towards Eastern religions, Eastern oriented religions. So he says, number one, people are looking for something scientifically advanced. They want detailed explanations about God. So wherever they get that information, they want to go there. Second is the leaders are not setting good example, right? They're not following the moral principles. So character is lacking. And then number three is Krishna consciousness is very practical. So naturally people want to um, apply it, because anything practical gives power to the individual, which is beautiful, right? Everyone wants to have control over their lives. So when they see something practical that they can apply in their daily lives, they feel empowered, right? So I think these three reasons are very um, prominently brought out by Srila Prabhupada in this conversation. We should remember this when we talk to people who may be looking for uh, spiritual dimension in their lives. And also keep in mind that we're not trying to convert someone from this religion to other. We just want them to go deeper. If someone has um, good background from their own parents and religious traditions, that's great. Just build on that and go deeper. Now, if they want more detailed explanations, the first point that Srila Prabhupada raises, then sure, we are happy to give that information as well. Right? The next topic that they talk about is actually about the what the journalist calls the sexual problem, and then how that usually keeps people away from religion, right? So what comes out of that conversation is Srila Prabhupada says his disciples have a higher taste. That higher taste, of course, is Krishna consciousness, and it is working. I'm already teaching Western men and women how to control their sexual impulse. My disciples that you see here are all Americans. They're not imported from India. Now, if somebody comes to me and says, Swamiji, initiate me, I immediately say you have to follow these four principles. No meat eating, no gambling, no intoxication, no illicit sex. Many go away, but this mantra seller, he does not put any restrictions. That's just like a physician who says you can do whatever you like, you simply take my medicine and you'll be cured. That physician will be very popular. Then the journalist says, yes, he will kill a lot of people, but he'll be very liked. Srila Prabhupada, yes, and he laughs. And a real physician says, you cannot do this, you cannot do that, you cannot eat this. This is a botheration for people. They want something very cheap. Therefore, the cheaters come and cheat them. So basically, he emphasizes this mentality which he talked about earlier, that people are looking for something very cheap. Actually, he calls it a fault. Yeah, so there's the second reason he gives as to why people are attracted to show bottle spiritualists. That's found in um, page 114 of this book. So Prabhupada says um, people are accepting them as God because they do not know what God is. That is the problem. So that's the second reason he gives. So number one was people want to be cheated because they have that fault sometimes in them where they want something very cheap. And then the second is they do not know what God is. They do not have a definition of God. Right? So one of the things we should probably do when we share Krishna consciousness with people is to um, inquire what their understanding of God is, before we go too far. What is your definition? Right? Because there's a very scientific definition, there's a scriptural definition, there's all kinds of very authorized definitions of what God is or who God is. It's good to um, ask people what their understanding is, because that will allow us to give the message in the right way. When we understand someone better in terms of where they are today in their understanding of God. And then he briefly talks about how there is no department, very similar to the conversation we discussed last Sunday. Prabhupada says how there is no department to understand God. Last time we talked about um, department, lack of a department to understand the self, the spiritual self. So the same thing. Unless one knows God, one cannot really understand self. So understanding God is even more important because by that understanding, we understand our own self, right? Um, and then Prabhupada concludes the conversation with how scientists, they have so many departments, but unfortunately, they've not been able to solve the miserable conditions of life: birth, old age, disease, and death. The scientists are trying to be happy and make other people happy, but what scientist has stopped these four miseries? Has any scientist succeeded? I don't think so, says the journalist. So Prabhupada says, why do they not consider? We have made so much improvement, but what improvement have we made in these four areas? They've not made any. And still they're very much proud of their advancement in education and technology. But the four primary miseries remain as they are, you see. So it's interesting. The conversation starts with show bottle spiritualists, right? Show bottle bogus gurus. But it ends with Srila Prabhupada's very stinging criticism of the scientists. So this is another brilliance of Srila Prabhupada, right? So he's not just focused on one kind of teacher that is not bona fide. He's just looking at the broader picture and he's saying whoever is posing as the expert but is not really is actually a show bottle expert, right? So it's not only just bogus science, it's even scientists who are claiming that they know everything, but actually they don't. and they are not able to um, solve the four basic problems of life. So, in one sense, they're also cheating people and misleading people into thinking that they have the solution, right? So it's in general, Prabhupada's message is about experts should really have um, should really be based on an expert's knowledge should really be based on authorized sources. That's one thing. Second is the expert should be exemplary in moral principles, right? And then they should really help people achieve happiness, and that is only possible if one is spiritually situated and if one is able to address the four miseries of life: birth, death, old age, and disease, right? So um, very clear explanations by Srila Prabhupada and enlightening us on how and where we can find the true spiritual teacher. And in this very book, the next topic talks about the bona fide spiritual master, right? There's a very nice chapter on that. So, kind of leading to that. So, you know that who is not a bona fide spiritual teacher, and then you also know who is. So, we can approach the right person. So, let me stop there. That conversation actually ended with that note. Any questions or comments?
So I have a question. Why would people want to be cheated?
Um, so Srila Prabhupada says they want um, something cheap. So basically, some instantaneous results, right? So, and this comes to how our mind works. So when someone is not on the spiritual platform, the mind is the dominant faculty, right? We talked about this briefly in one of the classes. But the way the mind works, if mind is the driver, it's going to want instantaneous things. The mind doesn't have much patience unless it is guided by um, consciousness, spiritual consciousness, and spiritual intelligence.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. In a sense, we want something easily. In that sense, we are kind of
Right. So it's more that's the the impulse that's leading to people looking for quick results. So in that sense, Prabhupada is saying they want to be cheated. So not necessarily, it's not, people don't have like the intention that I want to be cheated today. So let me go.
but they're setting themselves up to be.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Usually that's not the case. Very rarely, maybe, but usually it's not the case. It's more like the struggles of the mind that's pulling them here and there. Um, I lost the. Are you able to see my video?
Yes.
Okay, because I lost it here. As long as you're all able to see.
No, we can see.
Okay. Um, it's a good question. Any other question or comment? Now, maybe something that I wanted to explore with you all is this conversation is very unique, right? This is Srila Prabhupada, you know, commenting on different topics here, and especially this topic of show bottle spiritualists. And we heard how he starts off the lecture with, I can declare that all of this is nonsense. I can say furthermore, they're all rascals, right? So generally, we cannot imitate someone like Srila Prabhupada. So how would, in your own sharing of Krishna consciousness, how would you explore this topic with someone? So let's assume you're talking to someone. Let's take this scenario, right? You're talking to a family, or a family individual or a friend or some third party who has been influenced by show bottle gurus. And imagine you're having this one-on-one conversation with them, right? And um, your intention in that conversation is to help them see things differently. What questions would you pose to this individual? Give me some examples of questions that you would pose, because I'm assuming that we cannot just repeat what Srila Prabhupada is saying, in a rash manner. We cannot say, what you're doing is rascaldom. You're whoever you're following is a rascal, things like that, or what you're saying is nonsense. So if we assume that we are not going to take that path, and we want to be respectful, and we want to have a meaningful conversation, assuming that, what questions would you pose?
Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
So, what I, learned from scripture, right? If you're following any guru, like first thing is that the guru should be bona fide. When we say bona fide, means it's coming from some, bona fide disciple succession where it has an origin. So that's what I would say.
Parampara, you're saying.
Parampara, yeah.
So I want to specifically ask everyone here to pose a question. So what is the question you would pose?
So yeah, the question is like, okay, with the guru which you are following, like, is he coming from some parampara, or he is just
Okay.
we know, right? Today many gurus, they are saying that, oh, they're whatever they say that they're saying because that's their instinct, or that's correct, like that. Yeah. So
Okay. So you're basically asking, could you share with me if the guru that you're following has any teachers that
yes,
he followed, or does he come in a line of teachers?
exactly.
Right? Okay. And actually, let me pose a related question also, right? Which is, imagine you're talking to someone from a Western background and someone from Eastern, right? How would you pose these questions? Okay. So the reason I'm doing this exercise is, one of the things I'm trying to get better at is, when we talk to someone, typically our tendency is to tell them versus ask, right? So this asking versus telling challenge we all have, and it happens all the time, right? Whether it's with our spouse, kids, relatives, family, we have the tendency to tell, right? And especially it's a strong tendency that comes out when we try to share or preach Krishna conscious philosophy to others. So could we move to more an asking kind of conversation versus telling? So that's where I'm getting at. That was the intent behind this. So Prabhu, the question that you raised, would that be different if you were talking to someone from a Western background versus an Eastern background? And if yes, how would you pose it?
So Western background, like, we haven't seen any gurus like that. I've seen this many in Indian. Western, I can't think about what should I ask.
I would say, I mean, is the person you're following, is he known for by is his name more famous, or is he glorifying God?
Okay. Okay. So is he at the center kind of idea,
Yeah,
right?
he
So,
is. Yeah, is his movement known by his name versus by by
very nice. Very nice.
glorifying God?
Very nice. Okay. And the way you presented it, it was very nice, actually. I think no one should be offended by your question.
Exactly.
Very nice. Okay. Um, any other question? And how would you actually, going back to the question you just said, how would you say that to an Eastern person from an Eastern background, say India?
Oh, Eastern person, I would be much more explicit, and I've said this to my cousins and some of my own family, that um, like when I talk about ISKCON itself, it's known as the Hare Krishna movement. It's not known as the Prabhupada movement.
But
And
now, but it sounds like you're telling.
telling, right? I'm not asking.
So how would you pose the same question? Is it because it was a fantastic question? So help us here with Eastern background.
Go ahead. Somebody
Yeah.
else had.
Looks like someone else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. I mean, I would ask, what is in that person you got attracted by?
That's a good question, Janamarani.
Very nice. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
I think the way you presented it there, I think it will apply for everyone. That was very simply put, right? What is it that is attracting you? So because you're trying to understand, which is very important, right?
Right.
Because see, think about the difference between someone like Srila Prabhupada and us is Srila Prabhupada already has that understanding of where someone's heart is. In our case, we don't. We need to uncover some of this, right? So Srila Prabhupada is way ahead. He's like, as soon as the journalist said the first sentence, he didn't even finish. Prabhupada said he's nonsense, right? So that's a key distinction to understand. So that's a very good question. Any other questions you would pose on this topic of show bottle spiritualism to someone you've come in contact with, you're talking to?
Another question I can think about is, okay, what philosophy you follow?
What philosophy you follow?
Right.
Can you elaborate on that a bit more?
I mean,
What are you trying to get at? What are you trying to get at?
means
I
what
think
is your yeah, go ahead.
What is his philosophy is what you're trying to ask, right?
Right. Like what means what is their philosophy is like, that's what I'm trying to say, understand.
Okay.
Because we have a
so could you share the philosophy of your teacher? That's what you're saying?
Yeah, what is your philosophy? Can you explain, like, or what do you think? Like, means just trying to understand, like they follow Bhagavad Gita, or they have, like, we know, right, Advaita, Advaita philosophy, like many. So what philosophy they're following, like that?
Okay. So a Western individual may say, yeah, this teacher that I'm following, I don't know, is a follower of, Spinoza or someone, right? So, okay, that's a good question. You're trying to understand whether, what philosophical viewpoint that they are familiar with. Okay, great. What else? Any other questions?
Because why I'm saying, like, many times when you go for book distribution, right, in a Western events, like many people come across say that, oh, they I met personally one time where they say that the person came and he just looked at the books, and they said that, then started he asked me question, okay, do you think that this is the only path you have? I said, like, yeah, I mean, this is one of the authentic path, I said. Then he said that, see, it's your liking, that's it's your path. My path is something, he said. So that's how I'm trying to correlate.
So actually, you're raising a very interesting example. Can we spend a little bit time on this? So when he asked you, is this the only path, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe one option is to maybe ask him why he's asking, right?
Mm.
Instead of necessarily saying, no, we're not this or that. Maybe you could understand more where he's coming from, right? Is there a reason why you're asking? I'm curious because that's a very good question, right? Does it
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah. I mean, that's what he said. Like, I mean, when I said that I didn't say that this is the only path. I said this is one of the authentic path. Then he said that, okay, see, it's applicable for you. That's for your path. And it's up. My path is, he's, I think, following, I don't remember. He's following some kind of yoga, something. And he said that I do the yoga and it's working out me. That's why it's my path.
Exactly. So that's my point.
Yeah.
When if we could, instead of telling, if we could ask what it might take us in a different direction, where instead of that quickly ending it as you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back, we're all good, let's be friends, right? Instead of that, you could probably probe why he's asking, because he might say, he might give you more. For example, he might say, if you ask him, why are you asking this question? He might say, look, based on the other, my meetings with other religious people, I hear that they always say this is the only path. And I don't agree with that, right? He or she may say something like that. And then that once again allows you to ask the next question, right? Could you share why you don't agree with that?
Sometimes though, it's better to somehow get them to get the book, Srila Prabhupada's books, rather than try, because I mean, I don't do as much book distribution as Rasraj Prabhu is talking, but in California, I actually sold a Bhagavad Gita to a person who was a Buddhist. He said he was following his yoga, he was doing this. And so rather than say, this is a better path or something like that, we said, what you're doing is great, but this has everything that you already follow and then some, you know what I'm saying? And he actually liked that. He said, well, let me read it and see what it might have. So reading Srila Prabhupada's book is going to convince him more than I could spend like 4 hours trying to convince him about something. So the intent of actually getting that book into his hands was a better strategy than my trying to convince him one way or the other,
Yeah, in that particular case, it sounded like it worked really well. It worked really well. Yeah. Any other questions that you can think of, or that you can share from your experience?
But a lot of times, I mean, like you said, the show bottle gurus, I find from my, at least, evaluation, a lot of the gurus in the field, they look like self-help gurus
Right.
rather than really gurus who can take you to a destination of freeing yourself from the cycle of birth and death,
Right.
And many a time, some of the people that you're talking to, if they're following a certain guru, they actually tell you bluntly that they're not interested in that goal. They just want the limited, self-help perhaps.
Right.
They're not interested in that greater goal. If they're not interested in the greater goal, you can't shove it down somebody's throat.
Right. I think there are two cases, right? One where if you need help on a certain topic and that's what you're interested in right now, that's okay. And it's what we are saying is the people who are helping, they shouldn't pose themselves as something that they're not, right? That's the problem
Right,
that we are trying
right.
to
That's
do.
the problem.
If
Exactly.
someone says, I'm a self-help guru and this is all I
Right,
know,
right. Yeah.
this is
And there
all,
are many of those who just
right,
don't pose themselves as gurus. They just say they're self-help,
exactly, exactly. And they're self-help
person.
and they're very well-intentioned people. They
Right.
do a lot of good. And
Mm-hmm.
that's great. We don't mind that. But it's the problem is who pose themselves as guru and use self-help as a crutch.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's the concern.
And it impresses people with their word jugglery.
Right. Exactly. And so something that I was thinking about was every decade or every year, these so-called gurus, they catch up on a trend and then they ride on that wave for a while, right? They become famous. So sometimes the trend is let's say social service is very popular. These so-called gurus may use that as a medium to bring people in, right? There are, especially in India, it's very common for um, the show bottle spiritualists to attract people through big social service programs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they have, along with that, they have kirtans and this and that. But the way they attract people is social service, and that's primarily what they do. And but there's not really God in the center. And so that's one trend that they latch on to. Another one is mental health, right? Since mental health is very much sought after today, some of these so-called gurus advertise that as something that they have a solution for, right? So they latch on to different trends, and that's what distinguishes them from a bona fide guru like Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada is not after trends. He's not after fads, right?
Right. And they're
He's
giving
very
them an easy
right.
solution without asking them to give up anything.
Exactly, exactly. He's very cognizant of the trends. He's very well aware.
Mhm.
He's super smart, but he doesn't use particular trend to falsely attract people, right? So anyway, we are fortunate. Any other questions or comments? How are we doing on time? Oh, okay, it's 4:55. Time flies, huh? Um, any final thoughts? Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Sure. Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Have a safe and nice day. The weather is nice.
Yeah. Time to go for a walk.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.